True Crime Brewery contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Medical information is opinion based on facts of a crime and should not be interpreted as medical advice or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.
Oh, I just walked in. My wife, I believe she's been shot. It's got blood everywhere.
Okay, sir, is she breathing?
I think she's already dead. She's 8 months pregnant.
Okay, sweetie. Just stay on the phone with me, okay? Is there any way that you could see if she's breathing for me?
I can check. She's dead.
Okay. Okay, well, I'm going to send them over there. Okay, when was the last time you saw her?
Oh, it's been several hours.
Several hours?
Yes.
So was there anybody around when you walked in?
No. I was with my son. I ran him across the street. The back window on my back door has been busted out.
Okay, does it look like someone made entry into the house there?
It looks like it. I don't know. When I ran my son across the street, gave him to a neighbor, and then came right back in.
Just hold on the phone. Let's see if we can do anything for her, okay?
No, God.
Welcome to True Crime Brewery. I'm Jill.
And I'm Dick.
This episode is sponsored by Madison Reed. Madison Reed is revolutionizing the way women color their hair with gorgeous, salon-quality, multi-dimensional hair color that's delivered to your door and according to your schedule. With Madison Reed, you can have the look of professional hair color without spending the time or the money. Join the hundreds of thousands of women, me included, who've tried and who love Madison Reed. Just visit madison-reed.com and get 10% off plus free shipping on your first color kit by using the promo code BREWERY. That's madison-reed.com and promo code BREWERY. Okay, Dick, do you want to just remind people of our new contest?
Well, certainly. So we're doing a t-shirt contest. No, it's not a wet t-shirt.
No, that would be inappropriate.
It would. So what we're looking for is some new logos for our t-shirts. We're looking for new designs. So if you have a design, and it can be both front and back of the shirt, send it to True Crime Brewery at tiegrabber.com, and we'd love to have your entries.
That's right, and it's going on until February, so you have plenty of time to really make it just right.
You can even enter more than once.
Absolutely. And win $250. Pregnant mother Belinda Temple was 30, and she was found dead in her bedroom closet on January 11th, 1999, shot in the back of her head with a shotgun. Her husband David, a Houston area high school football coach and former local football star, was the focus of the investigation. But authorities did not have enough evidence to arrest him until several years later. David Temple was convicted of his wife's murder in 2007 and sentenced to life in prison. In 2016, he was released on an appeal and is likely to face another trial. He still maintains his innocence today, alleging that Belinda was killed by burglars during a botched robbery while he was out shopping with their then 3-year-old son. This is a very complex case that we have examined from many angles, from David's entitled childhood to dating abuse, affairs, life insurance, questionable forensic evidence. We're letting you decide whether or not David Temple killed Belinda and their unborn daughter. Did a life of being told how special he was lead David Temple to think he was above the law? And if that was the case, his family was probably behind him after Belinda's murder, reassuring him that he was loved and supported, just as they always had whenever he got in trouble at school or had trouble in relationships. But there are other possible suspects. We'll talk about those as well. So we're calling this episode Sympathy for the Devil, the murder of Belinda Temple.
Nice title.
It kind of gives away my opinion on it.
Yeah. Well, and I would just say this is the first one we've done where there was pretty divergent views from our sources that we consulted.
Yeah, which was good, really. Kind of helpful.
Well, yeah, I guess. I mean, the book we read first was very anti-Temple.
Yes, it seemed to think that he definitely did it.
You read the book and there's no question in your mind that he did it. And then the TV shows, 48 Hours or whoever it was.
There were 2 48 Hours episodes, yes.
And they're more pro-Temple, particularly the second one.
Yeah, the most recent one really makes it seem like he got a bad deal at trial.
Yeah.
Which is especially interesting for me because the prosecutor was Kelly Siegler, who we've just fallen in love with on that show Cold Justice.
Yeah, I know. But she comes across in the TV show as being basically dishonest.
Well, she really has to defend herself.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a really interesting array of things to discuss here.
Oh, for sure.
So let's get some beer and get started.
All right, let's get some beer. So we're doing a Texas beer. This is Yellow Rose from the Lone Pint Brewery in Magnolia, Texas. It's an American IPA, and these are beers that are pale gold to dark amber in color. They have a big herbal and or citric hop aroma, some balancing malt, and they're medium-bodied. Now this particular one, Yellow Rose, is a hazy gold color, has a small white head, but there is a ton of lace in this one. Very pretty. It had a citrus and tropical fruit aroma. Taste was grapefruit, lemon, pineapple, and mango.
Wow.
A nice mix.
And it worked out okay, huh?
Oh, God, it's a great beer.
I can't wait to try it. It sounds kind of refreshing.
It is. It's a pleasantly hoppy beer. There's still some malt present, so it wasn't in-your-face hoppy. Great beer.
Thank you, Dick. That sounds delicious. Let's open it up and head on down to the quiet end. It's a nice quiet day today. Different people would give varying accounts of the marriage of Belinda and David Temple. Belinda's family felt that David was controlling. When Belinda visited her parents or siblings, David rarely accompanied her. Belinda wouldn't stay long either, needing to rush herself and eventually her young son back home before David would become angry with her. It hadn't started out that way. In the beginning, Tom and Carol Lucas were impressed with their daughter's boyfriend. David spoke to Tom and got his approval before he even proposed to Belinda.
The proper way, right?
Some people think so. I mean, some people think it's insulting to the woman.
I can see that.
Yeah.
Tom and Carol Lucas weren't originally from Texas. They met in Port Huron, Michigan, where Carol worked at a dress shop. That was a few doors down from the dime store where Tom was the assistant manager. Carol's boss introduced the couple, but it took a year, or almost a year, before they actually started dating. They got married in 1962 and traveled through Ohio, where Tom worked at a steel mill. They had children fairly quickly and in quick succession.
Yeah, they did.
These guys put kids out. Brian, then Barry, then Brent. And she got pregnant for the 4th time in 5 years when they learned that Barry was deaf after he was almost hit by a truck when he ran out for a ball and didn't hear the truck coming. So Carol goes into labor in 1968. Back then, there were no routine ultrasounds. So they didn't know they're having twins. Surprise!
That would be really kind of fun.
I had that happen once. I went to a cesarean section for a single baby, and they delivered the baby, and I was tending to that baby, and there was an arm protruding.
Wow.
From the incision into the uterus. So we had twins.
Wow.
And back then, they weren't real keen on letting dads into the delivery room until after the fact. So Dad comes strolling in afterwards, and Mom says, "Jesse, I got some news for you."
That's exciting.
So anyway, this was a happy surprise for the Lucases when they've had 2 girls, Brenda and Belinda. The name Brenda had already been picked out for a girl, but they came up with Belinda just before leaving the hospital.
Yeah, Carol was a stay-at-home mom because she had these 5 kids to care for.
5 kids in 6 years or something?
5 years.
This is amazing.
Yeah. Well, I guess they didn't know much about birth control, or they wanted a big family. But Belinda was the most energetic. She always wanted to be the first in every line. She learned to ride a bike first, and then she taught her sister Brenda. She was always very motherly with all of her siblings. She was the only sibling to learn American Sign Language to communicate with her brother Barry. Now, he could read lips, but it really meant a lot to him that Linda had made the effort to learn how to communicate with him that way. Brenda and Belinda were not identical. Belinda started out smaller, but she became the larger daughter. She was very athletic with light brown curly hair, and Brenda was more petite with straight hair.
Christmas was always Belinda's favorite holiday. The family opened gifts from youngest to oldest, so she was always the first one, because she was 11 minutes younger than Brenda. The early years were good ones, but things changed in the mid-70s.
Yeah, the family went through some hard times, it sounds like.
They sure did.
Tom had an accident at the mill, and he needed a year off of work and rehabilitation. And the steel industry was hurting at that time, so Carol and Tom decided to move their family to a place where they might have more opportunities.
Yeah, so they moved to Nacogdoches, Texas, where Tom had family nearby, both a brother and a sister. And Tom's parents followed soon after. So Tom opened a cultured marble business, selling sinks and countertops.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's a big change.
Yeah.
From a steel mill to a countertop business.
It is, but I think he was kind of an all-around handy guy, so he probably had some experience with that as well.
Yeah. But after this injury, all the Lucas kids felt that their father became more demanding and more hardened. Carol would say that he was always a good husband, but he was a very involved person in his kids' lives, and he could be tough with the kids.
Well, I mean, to be on his side here, that's a big responsibility if you're the breadwinner for 5 children, a big family like that. And you've injured yourself. I can't imagine the pressure that you would feel.
No kidding. Plus, he's moved them.
Right. So there's a lot going on.
There's a lot of stuff.
Belinda kept busy when she got to junior high with the Future Farmers of America and sports. She played baseball, basketball, and she really excelled at both. She wasn't a natural-born athlete, but she worked very hard. She spent spare time lifting weights and running to keep in shape, and she really stood out on her basketball teams. And she was a big team player at the same time, so she wasn't afraid to share the ball, which made her likable.
Well, sure. She got along with everybody.
Yeah.
So in high school, Belinda dated, but never got serious with anybody. So she decided she wanted to go to college and become a teacher. Now this made sense. She'd always been good with kids. So she stayed at home, picked up credits at Angelina Junior College nearby, while she worked 2 jobs to pay her tuition to college. Now eventually, she ended up clashing with her mother and father, particularly her father, over curfews and rules. So she was an adult, she wanted to have more freedom, and eventually moved into an apartment with 2 girlfriends.
Yeah, at that time, Belinda was dating a guy that she'd gone to high school with, and they became engaged, but she ended up breaking it off. She found out that he was unfaithful, and he did beg her to forgive him, but Belinda didn't want to be with him anymore. So her sister said she wasn't the type to hang on to a relationship if it wasn't working. She was confident enough to just get out of it and break it off and move forward in life. And this is different than the way she was at the time of her death. She seemed like she'd been kind of beaten down.
She sure did.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not the high school kid who said to the straying fiancé, "We're done."
I know, right?
She kept putting up with everything that her husband was doing.
But, you know, that David Temple seemed to have a way with women. He could really be quite manipulating. She wasn't the only one.
A silver-tongued devil.
That's right.
To just put in more song references here.
Thank you. So the following year, Belinda left the junior college for Stephen F. Austin University. She was extremely busy. She worked 3 jobs, one as a grocery store clerk. She also taught aerobics classes, and she worked with animals on a farm.
Yeah, she's 19 years old, and she's a good-looking woman.
Yes.
She is physically fit.
Well, she's an athlete. Yeah, she's muscular.
She's a hard body,
yep,
as we say. So she turned heads whenever she went to clubs with friends. So she meets David Temple at Stephen F. Austin University. David was a local celebrity. He is a handsome and talented football player. David grew up in Katy, Texas, which is a suburb of Houston. The majority of the 12,000 residents were middle class and white. It's a coastal prairie town surrounded by rice fields, and they're proud of the 3 F's, family, faith, and football. And it wasn't necessarily in that order.
No, I mean, football might have been first for a lot of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
A lot of famous athletes out of Katy.
And this is foreign to me, this whole community being into football like that.
I know.
It's weird.
You're not into that stuff.
Well, that's not the way I grew up, but it's just amazing that these were big schools, too. A lot of kids and big stadiums.
And they had stadiums that were bigger than most of the stadiums in New England where we attend games and stuff.
Yeah, and it's not just the high school families that support the football team, it's the entire town. On Fridays, businesses close early, and cars head down to Jack Rhodes Memorial Stadium, and that stadium is huge. It holds 9,600 fans. So that's about 2/3 of the population of Katy that's going to the games.
Yeah, like you said, it's a big thing.
Yes, absolutely.
And where I went to college, if we had 1,000 people attending a game, that was a crowd.
Yeah, right.
So David's mother, her name was Maureen. She had family going back generations in Katy. So she's old Katy.
Yes, she is.
She married Ken Temple in 1961. They lived in Houston until 72, but then they built a house on family land just down the road from Maureen's parents. Now, Ken and Maureen were perceived by the townfolk as aloof and conservative, and Maureen was seen as a good Christian woman. They had 3 boys, Darren, David, and Kevin.
Now, they weren't wealthy, but they were quite well known in the town, and it was important to them to keep up appearances. On Sundays, their entire extended family had a lunch after they went to church, and their gatherings were loud and fun, with the boys and men, of course, playing some football.
You know, this is something that might come up later when we discuss it, but Ken, the father, didn't hunt, but the grandfather taught all 3 boys to hunt birds. He took them dove hunting often, and this was normal for the time and place. A friend of David's would say that about 75% of boys who grew up in Katy had their own shotgun. Shotguns and bird hunting are part of growing up in Katy. Every boy got a shotgun for Christmas or a birthday, and they all learned how to shoot.
Yes.
And we're going to find out later that they denied that David ever had access to a shotgun.
Well, at least the kind that was used in the crime.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, all 3 of the Temple boys played Little League. Early on, David excelled at football, though. And football is what made him a local star and made his whole family feel special. Now, he was a broadly built boy with a lot of enthusiasm for the sport. He started in youth football when he was only 5, and he loved the action, and I guess what was particularly helpful is that he was fearless. He was not afraid to get hurt.
Well, that's what the coach is like, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole other topic, but yes.
Yeah, but yeah, he was in the middle of everything. So David was a pretty charming kid. He loved to tell jokes. He loved to make people laugh.
Yeah, a bit of the jock and the class clown.
Yeah, I guess that hides his intellect.
Well, I don't know if we know much about that, but okay.
That was a gratuitous insult.
It sure was. That came out of nowhere. Just like snarkiness.
I know. I just don't like this guy.
I know.
But I'm figuring somebody who's a jock and a jokester can't be an intellect too.
Well, I don't know. I mean, he could have been.
He could have been.
But he really won people over with his smile and his personality, and his parents began to treat him as the special one. If anyone came to them and said that David had done something bad, they'd just go and ask David. And if David denied it, well, that was good enough for them. I mean, David wouldn't lie. They would back him up and they'd say, well, he said he didn't do it, he didn't do it. And as he got older, he really seemed kind of untouchable. He wasn't held accountable for anything, and they probably weren't doing him any favors by doing this.
No, I mean, these days we would say that they were enabling him.
Exactly. Because life's not like that. And you need to be prepared to fail, and you can't always be the best, and there are a lot of lessons there that he probably didn't learn.
No, for sure. So by junior high school, David was a starter on the football team. He was both popular and feared. He had a gentle side, but he also had an egotistical personality that made him think the world revolved around him. He was special.
Yeah, people told him that.
In junior high and early high school, he dated a girl named Hillary Brooks. He began seeing another girl named Jenny Barlow, and he started going back and forth between the two. Wouldn't break up with one or the other. He just kept both of them kind of dangling.
Kind of toying with them, yeah.
And he seemed to enjoy this.
Yeah, he liked keeping them on edge.
And so finally Hillary, the first one, had had enough. She broke up with David. He cried, but then he struck out against her, calling her names, making fun of her in public.
So that's his dark side.
Yeah. So it's not just enough to be broken up with. You got to trash the person who's doing the breaking up.
Well, and he actually got his friends to join in, and it made her life quite difficult. If anyone wanted to ask Hillary on a date after that, David would confront them, and then they'd back off because everyone was afraid of David. So he was sent to the school counselor, who told him to stop it, but he refused. Then one night, Hillary's pet rabbits were missing from their cages, and a classmate would later tell her that David had broken their necks. So this is Fatal Attraction-ish.
Well, they didn't boil them.
No, but it's still killing someone's rabbit.
Yeah, kill the bunnies.
That's not cool.
If that's true.
Pretty sick.
Yeah. So by high school, David was 5'11", weighing 210 pounds. And he was known as an intense and brutal player on the field. He's a middle linebacker, so he kind of led the defense.
So what does that mean exactly? Because I don't really know anything about football. It means that he's blocking people that are trying to score?
He's trying to tackle people that are trying to score.
Okay, so he's a defensive guy.
He's a defensive player. He's not a lineman. They're the ones that rush quarterback. He plays in the middle. And of the middle, he's the middle one of the middle linebackers.
So is that a good position?
It's an important position.
Okay.
You have to be smart. You have to call plays for the defense and figure out who's going to be doing what.
So he wasn't stupid then, you've decided?
Well, maybe not.
Okay.
He might have been stupid in some things.
Okay.
So he did. He led the defense. And the jocks at the school would say that David was basically a good guy, but others who weren't on the school teams thought he was a mean and intimidating person.
Well, yeah, if you weren't in the cool group, he could be a bully.
Yeah. So students walked on eggshells around David because you never knew what might set him off.
Yeah, even his friends were afraid to make him angry, so he did have a temper. Now, like I said, it's very possible that David was given a lot of slack because of his performance on the football field. His family, that's all they did with their weekends. They came and cheered him on Friday nights. And having a son who was a football player improved their stature in town, which they enjoyed.
Yes, they really liked that.
Yeah.
Because Maureen, anyway, is old Katie. So she's got tradition on her side. And then they have this semi-famous son. So that just enhances their status, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think at this point everyone had hopes like, wow, he's going to be in the NFL. He's just great.
Yeah, well, that's what he wanted.
But the competition out there is just incredible. I mean, I don't know what the statistics are, but very unlikely you're going to get in the NFL.
It is.
Yeah. So there was some talk that David used steroids to rebuild his strength and muscle mass after he had a knee injury in high school.
Yeah, that was like sophomore, junior year.
I think sophomore, yeah.
So he's trying to rehabilitate himself.
And they said he worked hard at it.
And he did, but probably with the help of steroids.
Well, that's a suspicion. There's no proof of that. But he did bulk up a lot, and he dominated the football field, and his temper seemed to get worse. He got into screaming matches with the coach, which I think is really not acceptable. But he was never suspended and never removed from the team. So by late high school, David had a reputation for being intimidating to teachers, students, coaches, pretty much anybody. Nobody was out of bounds for him.
Yeah, so one of David's brothers was dating a girl named Cindy Thompson.
Yeah, I think it was Darren.
Darren, okay.
The older brother.
Now, Cindy told about an incident. Darren showed up at Cindy's house one night very upset. He said that David and his mother had been arguing, and David became disrespectful to his mom. Darren stepped between them, told David to stop talking to his mother that way, turned David's anger towards Darren. He grabbed a shotgun, held it in Darren's face, backing against the wall in a corner of the house. So this is pretty serious shit.
Well, yes, he's holding a gun to his brother's head.
To his face.
Yes.
It's like he's going to blow his head off.
Yeah. Darren told Cindy that he had to beg for his life, and that his mother was crying and begging David to put the gun down. Now, Darren said that David had this blank look on his face, and his eyes were wide, and he was truly afraid of him. But finally they were able to talk him down. He put the gun down and walked out of the room. But Darren and his mother were pretty shaken up by this.
I would imagine.
Yeah.
This is a loaded gun.
Yes.
Pointing at my face.
Well, and considering what happens to his wife later, it's kind of significant. Or it's very significant.
I think there's some meaning in this.
Yes.
So by his senior year, David's team, Katy High School, is winning all his football games. David walks into local restaurants with his parents. People stand up to congratulate him, shake his hand, feed his ego some more.
That's what he needs, right? His head's not big enough.
Right. So David spoke confidently of a future in college and pro football. However, one tiny, small, insignificant problem.
Okay.
He wasn't big enough. Now, he might have been big enough for a high school middle linebacker, but he's not going to be big enough for a pro middle linebacker.
Yeah, I guess not.
No. So none of the major colleges, the big teams, like Texas, Alabama, those guys, they weren't recruiting him.
Right. Some of them did come to see him, I guess, but decided he was too short. They wanted linebackers to be over 6 feet tall. He's only 5'11", so...
And they needed him bigger.
Now, see?
He was 210 or so pounds. So you got to be, even back then, you got to be over 6 feet and 240, 250. Because linebacker is a very tough position. You got to be very physical.
Well, I just wonder if he had used steroids, maybe that stunted his growth and he screwed himself over.
Well...
It could, right?
Depending on when he started. I mean, if he started using steroids when his growth years were done, it wouldn't have any impact on it.
But I thought boys' growth years went up to like 20.
No.
No?
No, most males that are growing and going through puberty at an average age are done growing by 16 or so. So I think if he did do steroids, and I think he did, it didn't impact his height. And it could affect his weight. It could make him bulk up better.
Right.
So
well, they think
part.
It did, yeah.
But no, it wasn't going to make any big difference.
So there were a series of car burglaries the previous summer and fall, and someone was stealing radar detectors. Remember those? They called them...
Fuzzbusters.
Fuzzbusters. Those were big. And in February, a detective from Katy Police Department went to the high school to talk to a group of boys they had heard about. Now, the group called themselves the Rebels, and David was one of them. David and his friends laughed about the detective coming and asking questions. So this is a group of kids that are feeling pretty invincible and above it all. Now, detectives did find the fence who had been buying the stolen goods, and he talked. He said that he had bought the radar detectives from 2 Katy football players, and one of them was David Temple.
Yeah, so besides this robbery stuff, there's some other rumors going on about him. And one was that he once hit a man with his car and then beat the guy up after they got out of the cars to confront each other.
He's a hothead.
He sounds like a hothead. Well, if you're doing steroids, always have the possibility of roid rage, right?
Yeah, but I think he had that problem even before he was using steroids.
Well, yeah, he's grown up as a big entitled kid who's a star football player.
Yeah.
There's another rumor that David was driving a girlfriend in his car when he swerved toward an elderly couple, making them jump out of the way so they didn't get hit.
They actually went into a ditch.
No, that's not nice.
No, he seemed to think it was fun, though.
Yeah, he just laughed it off. So the Temple family is kind of embarrassed to have their hero son mentioned in the paper for his arrest in these stolen radar detectors.
Right. The other player said that they were selling the detectors to make money to buy steroids. And after David's arrest, he admitted to being involved in only one burglary, but his fingerprints matched those of another theft, and he was tied to at least 6 car burglaries. So although he's legally an adult by now, police went to his dad, and in the end, David and his friend were given deals, and they pleaded to a single Class A misdemeanor, attempted burglary of a vehicle. So he was sentenced to 3 days in jail and a $100 fine.
Yeah, now I'm taking this to be a courtesy to the family.
Yes.
Because they're old Katy people, and their son's a star football player.
Yeah, they don't want to destroy his career.
Right.
If he had one.
So we're going to cut him a break.
Yes. Which I don't know. I mean, I can kind of see giving a young person a break, but if they're doing it just because he's this special football player, I don't like that.
Yeah, not for that particular reason.
No.
I mean, I would agree that if this is your first offense and you're a teenager, yeah, you can cut some slack.
Right.
But they were doing it for other reasons.
Seems like it. Sure does.
So David's getting ready to graduate from high school, and he's not gotten into any of the big-time universities. But he did get a 5-year scholarship from Stephen F. Austin University. Now, this is a pretty big 1AA program.
What is a 1AA program?
1AA is a tier below the big boys.
Oh, so that's not too bad.
No, it's not. And there are plenty of players from 1AA that go on to professional football careers. So it wasn't necessarily the end of his career.
I see. So he still had hope.
He could have. Stephen F. Austin was a college program that was situated in a town that also worshipped football players. I think everyone in Texas worships football players. Maybe that's a generalization.
Well, 2/3 of them.
Yeah.
So his college team was the Lumberjacks. And the Lumberjacks, they traveled by plane to stadiums that held 10 to 15,000 fans. Now, me as a non-sports person, I was surprised that college teams fly around. I had no idea.
Yeah, well.
That's big time.
Yeah, well, this is just a step below big time, but they are still big enough to be taking flights. They didn't just travel by bus or anything.
So how do they keep up with their studies? If this seems like it's very time-consuming, takes most of their time, are they really getting an education? And I guess we're not going to go there, but just throwing that out there.
That's a whole other topic.
I know. It's something we've talked about before.
So the short answer is no. They're hired guns.
Yeah.
And they should be paid.
I'm not going there.
Okay, we'll leave that alone.
So David was a top player. At night, though, he often got into fights in the bars. One night, a frat boy spoke to David's date. Now, this was just like saying hi. It wasn't flirting. And he picked the guy up and threw him against the wall. So clearly, he could be set off at the smallest thing. Very possessive, jealous guy.
Yeah, and he has some other quirks, too. His football coach realized that David was the meanest player he ever had, who had to be in control at all times. And he's kind of obsessive. He dressed only brand-name clothes and showered several times a day. But on the field, he always gave 100%. Studied his opponents, he planned obsessively. His parents attended most games, which was a 3-hour drive each way. So that's pretty good of them.
So they're big supporters.
I mean, you're looking at 8-10 hours of time to go to the game.
I wonder what percentage of their parental attention was going to this one kid, and what about the other two?
Well, good point.
I'd like to talk to them and see how they feel.
They weren't the big football players, though, were they?
No, that's what I'm saying.
So I guess you've answered your question.
Okay. Well, in August of his second year, David met Pam Engelkirk, an elementary education major. Pam's parents had recently divorced, and David was very attentive and thoughtful with her. He sent her flowers and took her out to nice restaurants. Now, she knew about his bar fights, but she kind of shrugged it off. That's just David, she would say.
Whoa.
Okay. What?
I mean, that's just a piss-poor excuse.
She's young and naive.
I mean, that's just David. He just gets into fights.
I agree, but I think her saying that, I can understand. She's a young girl in love for the first time. She doesn't know.
Okay. Maybe I'll grant you that, but that just seems like a huge red flag.
It is, of course. Now, he always wanted her to be beside him, and she knew that she wasn't allowed to talk to other guys with him around or there'd be trouble.
See, there's another red flag.
But the way she explained it in an interview I read with her was that she felt like that was love. She didn't know any better. She thought the possessiveness that he felt over her was love, and it meant that he really loved her a lot. And this is not uncommon. I've heard this from many women.
I guess. But boy.
Plus, it was really exciting for her to be with this big football star.
Well, sure.
So she did become close with David's family, spending Christmas and Easter at their house, because her family was kind of broken up at that point. And the whole family put David on a pedestal, she said, but he really made her feel important and loved too. So part of that importance kind of rubbed off on her, and she thought, wow, I'm with this big, important guy.
Right. So I'm important too.
Sure.
Now, they weren't engaged, but she wore David's promise ring. However, here's a big however.
Okay.
And this is something that makes me think of what happens later on. They broke up because David pushed her against a wall in the bathroom and screamed at her because she wanted to spend an evening with her girlfriends instead of with him. So there's a group of friends in the room outside the bathroom. It took 3 men to haul him away from her. So holy cow.
Yeah, so she broke up with him. I'm like, go girl, but then she forgives him.
Okay.
And of course he promised it would never happen again. He seemed very devoted to her, and they started talking about getting married after college. But then there was trouble one night. Pam heard from a friend that she'd seen David dancing with another woman. And we'd find out that this was Belinda Lucas, who would become Belinda Temple. So Pam confronted David the next day, but he said, the dance didn't mean anything. He was sorry. He loved Pam, and, she took him back again.
Yeah. So out of nowhere, David told Pam that he needed to take a break from the relationship.
Yeah, that was only like 2 weeks later.
Yeah, and very quickly. So hindsight's so easy, isn't it?
It is.
So Pam is heartbroken. I mean, she's just learned that David was with Belinda, and she felt confused and rejected. She's been like a whole member of the Temple family.
Yeah, they'd kind of taken her in.
Yeah.
And she'd been talking about marriage, so this was kind of a shock. And it doesn't get any better when she writes to David's mother looking for some sympathy.
Mom's pretty cold.
Yeah?
So she writes the letter telling how devastated she was, and Maureen's response was, I know you and David's decision was mutual. We wish you the best. And that's it.
Yeah, so Pam felt pretty tossed aside and disposed of.
That's a pretty comforting note, isn't it?
Not just by David, but the whole family.
Yeah. But meanwhile, David and Belinda seem like they're going great guns.
Well, he seems to always start out good.
He does.
They were both athletic. They both loved to go watch sports. And early on, of course, he was a gentleman, treating her like a princess. So although all these things looked pretty good on the surface, Belinda's people, her friends and family, really noticed some changes in her that weren't good. She wasn't the same opinionated, confident girl that she had been. Now, David was very protective of her, but also kind of smothering. When they didn't agree on something, David would give her the silent treatment, and then she'd give in. Ken and Maureen really loved Belinda and felt like she was good for David.
Yeah, but Belinda's twin sister Brenda and Belinda's roommate Stacy just flat out didn't like David.
No, right away they had a bad feeling.
Yeah.
Or at least they say so.
Every conversation turned to himself and football. And Belinda was so passive with David, everything had to be his way. And just like you said previously, if they had an argument, he'd give her the silent treatment until she gave in.
Yeah. So I guess she was really in love with him, but also she was kind of losing her self-esteem.
Yeah. Plus, he didn't like her family very much. He referred to Belinda's family as rednecks and white trash.
That's really mean.
Yeah. And that's how you gain friends and influence people, right?
Well, you're marrying into this family, or you're at least, might marry into them. You're dating the girl. And then you talk that way about her parents. That's just not nice.
I know.
Now, his family, they appeared really close and loving, like they're the perfect family. And they welcomed Belinda in, so she started spending all her holidays with them, kind of making her family feel like chopped liver.
Yeah, but that was the path of least resistance.
Sure.
I mean, if she said, I want to spend holidays with my family, he'd go off.
Yeah, he would never go with her.
Yeah.
So David had some real problems with aggression, and she just wanted to placate him, it seems like. Now, in March 1991, David attacked a player on an opposing co-ed intramural basketball game, and he called it a dispute later after the player had cursed in front of Belinda. But
that's a good reason.
But David actually clubbed the man on his head out of nowhere and actually knocked him out. The man was much smaller than him, and an ambulance had to take him to the hospital. But people are still covering for him. The police officer told the man that if he let it slide, David would pay his medical bills.
And no charges got filed, so
right.
He let it slide.
So he's still not being held accountable.
Nope.
And that just makes everybody who lets him get away with this is kind of in on everything that happened.
I think
they
so.
are partially responsible.
Yeah. So meanwhile, David and Belinda are hot and heavy. They're a real couple. And in his senior year of college, he proposed to Belinda on the 50-yard line after a football game. How romantic.
To them it was.
And she accepted. How romantic again.
Mm-hmm.
That winter, his football career ended, and David had broken several Stephen F. Austin football records.
Yes, he did well.
He did, but he never got drafted by the pros.
He didn't, but that's hard to do, like I said.
Well, it is. And again, even if he's playing at an upper tier 1AA school, you got to really be a star.
Exactly.
So he wasn't. So they're going to get married.
The wedding was held at the Lucas family's church, but David's family kind of came in and took over the rest of the arrangements. And Belinda didn't seem to mind. She looked happy. Tom walked her down the aisle as she carried a bouquet of pink and white roses, and her siblings had some doubts about David, but they didn't say anything. He did seem self-centered and controlling, but there wasn't really anything specific that they could say, oh, don't marry him. Plus, she wouldn't have listened anyway. She's in love.
She wouldn't have.
There's just no doubt that she's in love with him. So they lived in married student housing for a year, and Belinda got her master's degree. They both worked for the university's intramural sports program. And that New Year's Eve was the last time that David would ever visit the Lucas family home. So whenever Belinda visited from there on out during their marriage, and it wasn't very often, David never came with her. So how rude is that?
Incredibly.
Yeah, that's not a give and take like a marriage should be.
Nope. So David gets a job in Livingston, Texas, teaching and coaching football. He and Belinda rented a house there. Belinda took a special education teaching job at a nearby middle school. There were concerns all over the place by Belinda's family and friends that things weren't going so well in the marriage, but Belinda never mentioned anything.
No, I mean, most people don't. A couple of years into the marriage, Belinda complained to friends, though, that David was never home. She wondered aloud if he was having an affair, but then she'd contradict herself right away and say, oh, he's just busy. He'd never do that. I'm just imagining things.
Then a new high school opens in Katy, Texas. Well, that sounds familiar. Hometown.
That's right.
So Belinda and David moved again. They began working in the high school and middle school and lived just 15 minutes from David's parents. They began to attend the same church with David's parents, and they participated in the Sunday afternoon get-togethers. So Belinda and David attended the same church with David's parents, and they participated in the Sunday afternoon get-togethers.
Yeah, David was vain.
Yeah, we've known that for a while, but he is.
Now, I guess it's not a fatal flaw, but his hair and clothing had to be just so, and Belinda even ironed his T-shirts for him, and then when he'd have his little boy later, he'd kind of pass that stuff on to his kid, wanting his kid to be perfect all the time.
Right. So there's a guy named Bill Norwood who was a coach and one of David's colleagues, and he remembered how David sometimes could lose his temper with students, and other coaches would have to talk him down and take him away from the area, so he still had that explosive temper.
Yeah, but the marriage still looked happy, even though those close to Belinda noticed that she was kind of quiet and more reserved when he was around, because she became really friendly with their neighbors, and David was more aloof. Now, Belinda was pregnant in 1994 with their son Evan. David was very excited to be having a boy, and he bought a small football uniform and helped to prepare the nursery. Brenda came to stay for a while after Evan was born, but she said she didn't feel welcome with David, and they just kind of tolerated each other for Belinda's sake. Belinda and David spent every holiday and most Sundays with David's family, and Belinda's family was feeling pretty hurt about this. Now, it didn't occur to them at the time that David wouldn't allow her to come visit. They thought it was her not wanting to see them.
Yeah, I mean, that's a shame.
It is a shame.
So after Evan was born, things went quickly downhill. David was an attentive father to the child, but he was cruel to his wife. He told Belinda she was fat. He made references to her formerly fit body. Now, Belinda tried hard to lose the baby weight, but her self-esteem was damaged because you got this husband all the time telling you what a pig you are.
And that doesn't help.
No.
Because then you just feel kind of hopeless. You lose your self-esteem. It's a bad road.
That's for sure. So Belinda had a couple friends she confided in, that lived in the same neighborhood. And she told them that she missed her parents, but David didn't want her to visit them and didn't want Evan around them. So she called them every Sunday, but never mentioned David. They just talked about Evan and her job. Now, they had a dog. David had bought this dog for Belinda a while ago, before they were married even.
I think so, yeah.
Now, this is a chow named Shaka, and this was some vicious dog.
He'd attack anyone who was outside the family.
Yeah, so he's very protective. They had to keep him in the backyard, fenced in. Otherwise, if he was in the house with other people there, he'd go for him.
Yep, and I read about several family members and neighbors who had some near misses with Shaka.
Yeah.
And were terrified of him.
Absolutely. This is something that's going to be important as we talk about Belinda's murder.
Yes, it is. Now, in the spring of 1996, Belinda took a job at Katy High School. A few months later, they met Tammy and Quentin Harlan. David and Belinda were at a Mexican restaurant with other teachers and coaches from David's school, and Quentin was just starting work at the school, so he was introduced to everyone along with his wife, Tammy. Now, the Harlans lived near the Temples, and the two couples started hanging out together. David planned everything, though. They grilled burgers and played cards after their kids fell asleep, and while David had some quirks, the Harlans initially liked him. Tammy thought he was very charming. He was a devoted dad, and Belinda seemed to adore him. Now later she would realize that the Temple's perfect life was a facade. David needed everything to be perfect, and Belinda did everything she could do to make him happy.
She did. Now, Belinda worked with two slightly older women at Katy High School, and they tutored students throughout the school day. Belinda was an enthusiastic teacher. She volunteered to help with games and events. And at games coached by David and Quentin, Brenda and Tammy really got into the games and cheered them on. David was a good coach, and he was well liked. Now, after the games, Tammy and Belinda would go home to put the children to bed, and Quentin and David would clean up and shower. So even though it was 10 or 11 at night, David often talked Quentin into going to a bar with him. So they wouldn't go home to their wives. They'd go out drinking.
Some nights, yes.
Some nights. Many nights.
Probably more than they should have.
Right. I think so. And if Quentin wasn't interested in this, David would call him names like, "You're a pussy boy," and tell him to run home to his overbearing wife.
Yeah.
Sometimes Quentin would give in. Sometimes he didn't. And when he didn't, David would get pissed off.
Yeah, now, interestingly enough, David didn't wear his wedding ring at the bars, and he flirted with women, sometimes even left with them. No one knew how much Belinda knew about his cheating, and the other coaches' wives didn't want their husbands hanging out with David because they thought he was a bad influence.
Guilt by association, right?
Well, he would lead you in that direction.
Wouldn't he?
He would. So they all heard these rumors that David was unfaithful to Belinda, and Tammy knew it was possible that the gossip wasn't true, so she didn't want to say anything to Belinda without knowing for a fact. And Quentin didn't share everything with her about this. Now, one night, Quentin came home with his collar ripped off, and he told Tammy that he and David had been out at a bar, and Quentin wanted to go home, but David wasn't ready to go, and he actually grabbed Quentin and yanked him by the shirt. So that was kind of outrageous, and then David never apologized or said anything.
This is your friend you're hanging out with.
Yeah, he's very domineering, it seems like.
Yeah. So then David's 10-year Katy High School reunion came up. Now, he didn't want Belinda to go with him.
So that's upsetting.
That's a big upset, right?
Yeah.
He went to the Friday night pre-party alone. And that night, many people saw him flirting with an old high school girlfriend. And in fact, David bragged to Quentin that he'd had sex with her. On Saturday, Belinda went with David to the actual reunion, and she came home in tears. She told Tammy that David flirted with every other woman in the building the entire evening.
Yeah, so how humiliating is that? I mean, I think most women would have left. I would have left. I wouldn't have stayed around for that.
I would have taken the keys and left and made him come home by himself.
Well, sure. Absolutely. But she doesn't have the self-esteem to do it, which is sad because it seems like when she was younger, she did.
For a brief time. I mean, she quickly came under his spell.
Quickly, yeah. But she was young. It's easy to do that.
Yeah.
So Tammy stopped wanting to be around David. He called her Little Mama and pointed out how slim she was in comparison to Belinda, his wife. so that made her feel very awkward. And he ridiculed Belinda's weight often, so Belinda was going to the gym and dieting and really trying to please him. When David was around, Belinda was kind of quiet and sullen. She seemed to walk on eggshells. If Tammy was visiting with Belinda, she would have to leave when David pulled up. Belinda found credit card receipts of David's from bars and even strip clubs, and she'd get mad and then she'd forgive him. Now, she talked more to Debbie and Cindy, the women at work, about these troubles in her marriage getting worse.
Things were getting worse. I mean, there's a steady deterioration in this marriage that the baby wasn't helping.
Yeah, it didn't seem to, although they did say he was a good dad.
To the baby. He wasn't a good husband.
No.
So Tammy is urging Belinda to stand up to David. Now, Tammy hated David and couldn't understand why Belinda put up with him. In 1998, the marriage was in pretty bad shape. David was continuing to pull away from Belinda. He'd sit and watch sports on TV, and Belinda would do all the yard work and housework by herself. That would fly here, wouldn't it?
No, that wouldn't go over well here, would it?
No.
No, we share responsibilities here.
So when school let out for the summer, Belinda called Debbie and Cindy and said David hadn't spoken to her in 7 weeks.
So they're living together and not speaking for 7 weeks? How does that work? That must be so awful.
It's kind of beyond my comprehension about how you could live with somebody like that.
Yeah. But then the silence broke one night, she said, when David kissed her on the back of her head and he told her he loved her, so I'd say big deal. But
yeah.
I guess that won her over.
It did, because they got back together. Not back together. They communicated better.
Right, and she forgave him.
Slept together.
Right.
She's pregnant.
A few months later, it didn't take long, she decided to have another baby. Now, Belinda's excited, she tells her friends, but Debbie at work is wondering, is she trying to fix the marriage by having a baby? People do that, and it usually doesn't work.
True on both points.
But Debbie was happy to see that Belinda was happy with the pregnancy, and she was hoping for the best and supporting her. I mean, what else are you going to do?
I don't know what else you can do.
That's all you can do.
I mean,
just be a friend.
If you haven't by this point decided to leave the creep, you have to be supportive.
Exactly. And hope that she figures it out on her own or things get better.
Exactly.
Now, when they found out they were having a girl, Belinda called David's parents as well as her own parents. And the Temples didn't have any daughters or granddaughters, and they were very excited about having a little granddaughter. Now, Tammy was just shocked to hear that she was pregnant because, as far as she knew, the marriage was on the rocks.
Yeah. I mean, these people hate each other. There's no way they're going to get together and have a baby.
Well, I think she knew that Belinda loved him. She didn't hate him. But it was a miserable marriage.
She badmouthed him a lot.
Well.
To Tammy.
Yeah. Now, she did, but then I think at the same time she would make excuses for him.
Oh, yeah.
So she wasn't totally out of the marriage. She still wanted it to work.
I think she did.
Now
She's hoping against hope.
Of course.
That some lightning bolt was going to come out of the sky and make David a better husband.
Right. It had been a really bad summer, so it's fall and she's feeling more hopeful. She and David were getting along, and they were excited about their new daughter's arrival. In August, David's school opened a new building, and David and Quentin moved to this new building, along with this other teacher named Heather Scott. So Heather, she's 29, and she's an English teacher. She's slender and blonde, and David is attracted to her. Well, Quentin is too, right?
They both are. And there's kind of a rivalry here.
Which is weird, because they're both married.
Yeah, I know. But
very strange.
So David and Quentin had, at this point, been working together for a couple of years, and they're very competitive with each other, or at least David's competitive with Quentin. So Quentin starts flirting with Heather, and David wants to one-up him.
Well, I think that made him more interested in her, that Quentin was interested in her, right?
Well, there's no question in my mind.
Yeah. Now, Heather had wanted to be a flight attendant, but she ended up majoring in English and becoming a teacher. And she'd recently ended a long-term relationship before she came to the school. And she shared an apartment with a high school friend who was named Tara Hall. Now, like David, Heather dressed meticulously. She put on makeup and got dressed up any time she left the house, according to her roommate. And everything she wore matched. Now, Tara felt like Heather had very low self-esteem. She was very thin-skinned and couldn't take criticism well, even about the simplest things. Now, when Tara first heard about Quentin, she didn't know he was married. A few times he stopped by their townhouse to talk to Hera and Heather, and Tara thought he was just this nice guy.
At that point?
Yeah.
I mean, they were just talking.
Right. Well, and she doesn't know he's married, so a relationship would seem fine to her.
Sure. So Heather and Quentin pretty much saw each other only at work, but then she started going out with the staff after work.
Right.
So then Heather started mentioning David, and later Quentin started mentioning Heather to David. So David knew that Quentin was interested in her, and meanwhile Tammy, Quentin's wife, hears about Heather from the other coaches' wives. But they didn't mention that Quentin was interested in her.
Well, no. Why would they? That wouldn't be good.
But they did see that Heather was a threat to their marriages. So everyone else is viewing Heather as kind of this predator.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, she's very flirtatious. Some people said she was attractive. Some didn't. But they called her the Barbie bitch, which I think is hilarious. So they said that she really had a thing for football coaches, too. So there's another warning.
Well, I don't think that Heather was real discriminatory. So it might have been football coaches this week. It might have been English teachers the next week. Who knows?
Right. But she's enjoying this attention, for sure.
That's for sure.
So around Halloween, Tara noticed that David's attention was focused on Heather. So during a weekday happy hour at a nearby pub, Tara saw the two of them pairing up, and others noticed this too. After football games, David and Heather spent some time together, while Belinda's back home pregnant and taking care of Evan. Now Belinda began to confide in her friends that David was no longer showing any excitement about the baby. At first he'd seemed happy that they were going to have a daughter, but now she really doubted if he wanted another child at all. He barely talked about the baby. He wasn't involved in any preparations, not going to the classes, not preparing the nursery, none of that.
Total lack of interest.
Now Tara began to find David in the townhouse with Heather on Friday nights. Sometimes they were curled up on the couch together watching TV with glasses of wine, as if they're dating. And one night, Tara came home and saw David's truck on the street, and Heather's purse was in the living room. Now, no one was downstairs, so she knew the two of them were in Heather's bedroom. And then after that, it just kind of became a regular occurrence, and gifts started showing up for Heather. She got perfume, candy, flowers, and love notes.
Yes, but he didn't send her underwear.
No, this was before MeUndies.com, who have really great options for both sexes.
Yeah, guys want underwear to look good and be comfortable as well as women do.
Well, putting on good underwear in the morning just helps me feel confident, sexy, even powerful, like I can take on the world.
Yeah, and you can feel good about MeUndies in many different ways. They're made from a... How you laugh, do you?
Yes.
They're made from a sustainably sourced, natural soft fabric that is 3 times softer than cotton.
That is soft.
That is.
Plus, they're breathable and come in tons of different colors, patterns, and styles. They have thongs, bikinis, and boy shorts for us ladies.
Yeah, and for the guys, they have just the right support for your precious jewels without being too tight.
So just go to MeUndies.com/brewery and you'll get 20% off, free shipping, and 100% satisfaction guaranteed on the best, softest underwear you'll ever own. That's MeUndies.com/brewery. So this is a limited time offer. Don't wait any longer. Start wearing the best underwear of your life. So it could change your life. And now, what's really cool is they have the Halloween collection with skulls, candy corn, and even glow-in-the-dark designs. So those are fun to buy for yourself or give as gifts.
So go to MeUndies.com/brewery, BREWERY, right now.
All right, good segues. So Heather seemed really flattered by all the attention. And when the faculty at David's school learned that he was married with a pregnant wife at home, they were disgusted by his openly romantic relationship with Heather. Did not go over well with them.
Well, they're conservative.
Well, I think anybody might feel bad for Belinda.
For sure. So David and Quentin both emailed and flirted with Heather. Quentin seemed unaware that David was sleeping with Heather. And David, for his part, didn't seem to think Quentin was a threat. David didn't mention Belinda to Heather. One night after a football game, Heather asked him if he had any kids. He told her he had a son with one on the way. And that was the end of the discussion.
Yeah, according to her, that's as far as the conversation went. They didn't talk about it. Now, David denied that he was seeing Heather to the staff who saw them together, even though they saw them at the bar together, flirting and whatnot. And late that year, as Belinda was entering the 7th month of her pregnancy, she often showed up at work looking really exhausted. So her co-workers, who were kind of motherly with her, Debbie and Cindy, tried to pamper her, bringing over a chair so she could put up her feet. And one afternoon, Belinda told Debbie that David just didn't seem interested in her or their new baby. She confided that she thought he was having an affair and he didn't want the baby at all. So Debbie was feeling really sad for Belinda, who she really loved. She tried to comfort her, and she said that, we should talk about whether you should stay in that marriage after your daughter's born, but right now let's just take care of you.
See?
So I think that's a great friend.
That's a good friend.
But as usual, Belinda backpedaled a bit, saying that maybe the pregnancy was making her paranoid. And she would cry at work, saying that she thought her marriage was in trouble, and then she'd say, oh, it's just hormones, so she's in bad shape.
She is. But meanwhile, Tara Hall, Heather's roommate, she's spending more and more time at her boyfriend's place because the boyfriend didn't care for Heather.
No.
The boyfriend...
He didn't like her roommate.
Right. And neither of them liked being around either Heather or David.
Well, especially when they're together, it was kind of gross.
Yeah, David's there a lot.
Yeah, he gave Heather a gold necklace, and Belinda didn't get a Christmas gift from David.
Yeah.
So that's shitty.
Very shitty.
Does that make you think of Love Actually?
Yes.
Well, at least he gave the wife the Joni Mitchell
he gave
CDs.
her the Joni Mitchell CD, right?
David didn't give her anything.
So, Emma Thompson came out ahead in that game.
That's right. Yeah, as usual, so they spent Christmas at David's parents, like they always did. And while they were there, she overheard David talking about getting a vasectomy. And this was shocking and upsetting to her because they'd never talked about it. He'd never mentioned it to her.
Yeah, out of the blue.
As far as she knew, they were going to have 3 or 4 kids.
So then after Christmas, twin sister Brenda came to visit for 5 days. And she noticed that things seemed to be very tense between Belinda and David. She'd heard them arguing before, but now they were constantly bickering. On Brenda's first night there, David said, "Look at your sister's big butt."
Wow.
And she's clearly hurt by his statement. But he continued to say it until Brenda looked at him and told him to shut up.
Yeah, what an asshole.
Total.
Now, Brenda, of course, felt really bad for her sister, who was tired and depressed. On New Year's Eve, while they were visiting David's parents, David announced that he was going hunting for the weekend. Belinda was surprised. She hadn't heard anything about it, but she didn't say anything, of course. Now, on New Year's Day, Brenda helped Melinda take down the Christmas decorations and put everything away, while David watched football. And after lunch, he left for his hunting trip. So cell phones weren't common yet, and David and Belinda shared one phone. So David took it with him in case Belinda needed to reach him if she went into labor. He never said where he was hunting or who he was going with. He didn't even say if he was hunting birds or deer. And I guess Belinda just didn't feel confident enough to even question him.
Apparently not. I don't know what the hunting seasons are. He just says, "I'm going hunting."
Yeah. Out of the blue, when she could really go into labor at any point.
She's ready to go.
Yeah.
So David ended up spending New Year's night at Heather's.
Well, that's what he'd planned all along.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
They had a party with Tara and other friends that evening. David told whoever was listening that he had told his wife he was hunting. And he'd even put his hunting gear in his truck to cover his tracks.
Yeah, like people are going to be impressed by this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, David thinks so.
Well, the next day, Belinda took Brenda to the airport to go home, and she really had no idea where David was. But she was holding out hope that things would improve after their daughter, who she was going to name Erin, was born. Now, Brenda left wondering about her sister. Belinda just seemed really lonely and tired, and she felt bad leaving her. She wished that Belinda would put her foot down with David and make him help out more around the house.
Right. So Belinda's cleaning her house, putting Evan to bed, and during all this time, David's just 15 minutes away, fucking Heather.
Well, you're putting it very bluntly, but probably, yeah.
So phone records later on would support the fact that David called Belinda just once during the 3 days he spent away from her. And that wasn't until he was on his way home Sunday afternoon. So he's incognito for basically the whole time until he's on his way back.
Well, I mean, he's clearly checked out of the marriage, so whether you think he's guilty of the murder or not, he has checked out of the marriage.
He certainly has. And yes, I think he's guilty of the murder.
Okay, well, we'll get to that.
We will. That evening, Bill Norwood, who's a coach at David's school, saw Belinda, David, and Evan at a local restaurant. They were sitting across from each other, not even talking. Bill's wife remarked when they were leaving that Belinda looked incredibly sad.
On Sunday, January 10th, Belinda was working on shelves in her garage. One of the teachers had given her some old shelves, and David hadn't gotten around to helping her paint and hang them. Many in the neighborhood were really surprised to see her doing manual labor when she was due to have a baby in a few weeks. But even though Belinda wasn't happy in her marriage, she was still excited about her baby. She was planning it and trying to keep a positive attitude. Now, on Monday morning, January 11th, Maureen Temple, David's mom, called Belinda and told her she'd cooked a pot of homemade soup. She told Belinda to come by after school and get some for dinner. Evan had a fever the night before, but Belinda didn't want to miss work unless she absolutely had to. She's saving her sick time for after the baby came. She took Evan to daycare and told them to call her at school if the fever did return.
Right, so at nearly 12 o'clock, the daycare called and said, Evan's got a temp of a little over 100, and he needed to be picked up. So Belinda called David at work because she had a meeting that she had to go to. She called him at work, but he didn't answer. She called several times, still not answering. So Belinda left to get Evan, telling the other teachers that she would be back once she got David home to watch Evan.
So Evan, I guess he seemed pretty sick. He was lethargic and warm to the touch, and he was sleeping when she carried him out to the car. She kept trying to contact David, and he didn't answer. Now later, phone records would show that she had connected with David. He left work at noon and met Belinda and Evan at the house. Now on the kitchen counter, Belinda had written down that Evan had taken Motrin at 12:15, and she got back to work around 1 o'clock, a little bit after 1. She had a 2:30 meeting with the parent-teacher conference, and it was about 3:20 when a co-worker saw her leave for the day.
Right. And Ken Temple, David's father, would say later that Belinda came by to pick up the soup that he and his wife had made for her.
I think his wife probably made it.
Okay.
I don't think Ken made soup.
Ken doesn't do that, does he?
I doubt it.
Anyway, so he pick up the soup. Belinda stopped by. She talked to Ken for a few minutes about Evan's illness, and the doctor telling her that the baby could come any time now. Then she left in a hurry to get home. So she was pretty eager to check in on Evan. And also, Monday night was a big night. It was bunco night.
Yeah, so that's a game she played monthly with some friends. And I guess it was a favorite thing for her to do. Also that night, the hostess was planning to serve enchiladas, which were her favorite, so she was still planning on going.
Right. And then at 4:38, the phone rang at the Temple house. But neither Belinda nor David answered. This was Brenda calling to tell Belinda that their grandfather had fallen and hit his head on a cement bird bath, and he is being airlifted to a trauma center.
So it doesn't sound like a huge accident, but I guess it was pretty serious.
It turns out to be.
If you get airlifted, that's serious.
But we know that at 4:38, nobody answered.
Right. So 45 minutes later, Ken called the house, and he went unanswered as well. He left a message saying he was just calling to check and see how Evan was doing. So just before 5:25, an 18-year-old neighbor named Angela walked along the street that ran alongside the Temple home. Now, as she approached the Temple's garage, a blue truck pulled up. She saw David behind the wheel, and she also saw a young child in the front passenger seat with no car seat. A few moments later, Peggy and Mike Ruggiero, who lived across the street, heard someone pounding on their front door. So Mike opens the door, and David thrusts Evan into his arms, and he says to him, "Someone has broken into our house. Take Evan." So David turned and ran to the gate to his backyard. Mike gave Evan to his wife and told her to call 911, and then he followed David. So he reached the gate just in time to see David run through the back door and close it behind him. The glass in the lower right panel of the door was broken just above the doorknob. David had shut the gate behind him, and when Mike opened the gate to go in after David, the Temple's dog Shaka charged toward him. So Mike shut the gate, staying on the other side from the dog. Shaka was agitated, growling, and throwing himself against the wooden gate.
Yeah, and we've mentioned before that this is a very protective dog.
So this is kind of an important thing that Mike said that he saw.
Yeah, he couldn't go into the backyard to get to the door to the house because the dog was out there and he's going to rip him apart.
Well, and David would say later that the dog was in the garage. So if the dog was in the backyard, it would be hard for burglars to get past him.
It would, because this is a dog that would just as soon eat you as look at you.
Yeah, I mean, Mike was afraid he was going to knock the gate down. He was holding the gate. Now, the 911 call from David was received at 5:36. David said that his wife had been shot by someone who broke in, and no one was there now. He was sure that Belinda was dead, and he seemed to be crying on and off. Now, the 911 operator tried to get a time frame to see if there was any way that the baby could be saved. David said he'd been gone at least 2 hours. Now, that wouldn't be true, even if he didn't commit the murder.
Well, he said he took the baby Evan to a couple playgrounds first.
One playground. We just don't know which one because he changed.
And then they went shopping.
Yeah.
And then they returned home.
Right.
So I guess 2 hours could be conceivable.
Well, okay. Well, we're going to go over the times when he was seen at the store and things like that.
Right.
Now, the dispatcher tried to get David to do CPR to keep blood flowing to the fetus. He said he would, but he cried and moaned about her condition, and I guess her head was, I'm going to say severely damaged, because I just don't want to be too gross about it, but it was pretty much gone. Yeah.
But he wouldn't do the CPR.
No.
Or couldn't.
Right. Now, want to tell us a little bit about the fetus's chances of surviving when something like this happens? Very short time frame.
Very, very short time frame. Minutes. I mean, the blood flow to the fetus is shut off once the woman dies. So you only have a very few minutes to keep blood flowing by CPR or whatever.
Yeah, so he would have had to find her right away and done CPR.
And continued CPR.
And someone would have had to come in and do an emergency section.
Right. So that
the chances weren't good.
The baby was doomed.
So we pretty much know the baby wasn't alive.
No.
But, I guess if you're losing someone like that, you should at least try if you can.
Well, I would see that.
Yeah.
But he couldn't or wouldn't do the CPR.
Right. So Mike was outside holding the gate against the dog. He was afraid that she's going to break through and attack him. And when police arrived, they couldn't get past the dog. So when David came out, he put the dog in the garage so the police could get into the house. And the first thing he said to them was, "My wife's dead." He told them that Belinda was upstairs. They did notice he didn't have any tears in his eyes, but I'm not going to put that much on that.
No, not at that point.
No, because he's in shock.
So inside the closet sliding door, Belinda was face down, lying slightly on her side. Her right arm was beneath her. Her left arm was awkwardly placed at the top of her head. Brain matter covered the floor next to her head. The blood had begun to congeal, and the paramedics knew there was no hope of saving Belinda or her baby.
So David was sitting outside with his head in his hands, and he was put into a squad car as detectives walked through the house, which was, of course, now a crime scene. Yellow tape was around the house, and neighbors were beginning to gather. David's hands were swabbed for gunshot residue. Now, Ken Temple had been called by a neighbor, and he and Maureen arrived on the scene by 6:30. Maureen was hysterical. She asked David what had happened, and he said, "I don't know, Belinda's dead." Now, police asked David to sign a consent to have the house searched, and he was cooperative. Detectives examined Belinda, and they easily determined that she was shot in the back of her head with a shotgun, so it was obviously a murder. Now, at the bunco game, when Belinda didn't arrive by 6:30, Tammy wondered if maybe she'd gone into labor. So she called the Temple house, but there's no answer. So when it's getting close to 7, Tammy and another woman decided to drive to Melinda's house to check on her. Now, when they arrived, they knew something was terribly wrong. The house was surrounded by yellow tape.
Yeah, there's cops all over the place.
Yeah. And David was sitting in a squad car. And Tammy immediately just blurted out, "Oh my God, David killed Belinda." Now we could take that to mean that she's just assuming it would be David. But then he's also in the squad car, so that would lead you to believe it was him.
Right.
Yeah.
Either way.
Either way.
So Tammy runs up to Ken, and Ken tells her that Belinda was gone. Tammy screams, starts crying. David's brother Kevin and his wife Becky arrive, and they stand near Tammy and David's parents. Tammy knew that Evan was at home sick, and David was home with him.
So that was significant to her that he had been home that day.
He had been home.
Right.
So there's an odd thing the police noticed in the house. There's a set of keys on a stair halfway up the staircase. And throughout the house, someone had opened drawers, but they didn't seem to be rifled through. They were just opened. In the den, the large 50-pound TV was on its side on the floor in front of its stand, still plugged in. So detectives began to think that the home was staged to look like a burglary. And David becomes a suspect.
Now, David did agree to go with police to the station to give a statement, and his parents followed behind in their car. They took him to the Clay Road substation, which later would be scrutinized as possibly a mistake. Now, if he'd chosen to go to the homicide headquarters in downtown Houston, they could have had a special interview room, where you can avoid distractions, and they think it's easier to get someone to talk if you're in a bare, blank, secluded room, obviously. Now, Tammy returned to the bunco game and told the other women what had happened. It was immediately agreed that David had killed Belinda, so that's what they all thought. Now, Tammy called Quentin, who was home with their children, and his immediate response was, "That SOB murdered her. I know he did it." So a lot of people are thinking that David is capable. So it doesn't mean he did it, but it is striking that so many people reached that conclusion so quickly.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. Now, Ken Temple tried to reach Carol and Tom Lucas, but now they're on their way to see Tom's father, who's in critical condition.
Right, he's the guy that fell and hit his head on the concrete.
Right.
So he's in tough shape.
Yes. So Ken calls Brenda, and Brenda's devastated, of course. This is her twin sister. So she calls her brother Brian. Now, at the police station, some believe David was in complete shock, and others found him to be kind of less than upset. Tom and Carol were notified of their daughter's murder while they were in the ICU with Grandpa.
Now, David said that he had a couple guns in the house, and the police found them, a 30-06 and a .22. These were not the murder weapons, since pellets found in a closet told them that Belinda was killed with a shotgun. But both weapons were fingerprinted and photographed anyway. David's interviewed, and he explained what had happened throughout the day. He said Belinda got home at 3:45. He decided to take Evan to the park for a while. Now, to me, that's a little strange. This is a sick kid.
Right. A lot of people thought that,
He's running a fever.
And they said he was quite lethargic when he was taken from the school.
Right.
Another interesting thing is David was kind of obsessive about safety with Evan, and he used to ride in the back when he and Belinda were going somewhere. He'd ride in the back with Evan in his car seat.
Yeah.
So it's very odd that he would have had Evan riding in the front seat without a car seat.
Without a car seat.
Yeah. Because he's only, 3.5?
Right.
He's little.
So anyway, he decides to take Evan out for a while so Belinda can sleep and get rested. He took Evan to a park, then to a grocery store, then to Home Depot. And when they got home, Evan was ready to ride his bike in the garage. Now, David says he left Evan
in the garage,
and he noticed the broken glass on the door. He didn't have any defensive wounds or scratches on his body, and Belinda was still wearing her jewelry, and there is an apparently undisturbed jewelry box on a bedroom dresser. So maybe robbery's not a motive.
Well, it was determined that Belinda was shot while she was on her knees, and it looked like a contact wound. So by looking at the blood spatter, it seemed that someone had rearranged the hanging clothes after she'd been shot.
Yeah, they're trying to hide the blood spatter.
Yeah, that's what they thought. So slacks hanging in front of it. They thought that could be a sign of someone who knew her. Now, Maureen Temple was interviewed with Ken Temple sitting right beside her. She answered questions, and then Ken would correct her several times. Maureen said that Belinda would not have committed suicide and she had no enemies. At one point, when Maureen had her head down, the female officer heard her say, "I just could not have raised a son who would kill his wife." And the officer said, "I didn't say anything about your son. Why would you think he might have killed his wife?" But before Maureen could respond, Ken broke in, saying that she didn't mean that.
Suspicious stuff.
Yeah. And he refused to leave her side. Now, Ken found a defense attorney for his son late that night. He said there would be no polygraph. Problems with David's statement included the position of the glass inside the door of the alleged break-in. It was off to the side, as if it had been broken when the door was open. Now, also the dog wouldn't let the police or neighbor enter the yard, so how would the burglars have gotten past him? David said that Evan was left in the garage to ride his bike, but if you look at photos of the garage's interior, there's really no space to do that.
Yeah, so you got to be outside the garage to ride your bike.
Yeah. Now, David would claim that the dog was in the garage when he got home. But there's some trouble with that, too, right?
Yeah, because the across the street neighbor said the dog was in the backyard.
Yeah, and he was right behind David, so David didn't go and let the dog out.
No.
No.
I mean, if David's story is that they get home, they open the garage, they come in, and he sees the door with the window broken, and he takes Evan across the street, how does he let the dog into the backyard?
Exactly.
The dog was in the backyard.
Right. So the morning after the murder, David revoked his consent to search the house, but that didn't really matter because police got a search warrant within an hour. Now, after collecting forensic evidence, they learned that David had been seeing another woman, Heather Scott. So in an interview with police, Heather said her relationship with David was casual and romantic. She talked about meeting him at happy hours after work, and she insisted that he never would have killed Belinda. She also said that 6 days before Belinda's murder, she had told David that she didn't want to continue the relationship in the way it was going. Now, according to Heather, David responded by saying that was fine by him, but nothing changed between them.
And meanwhile, the police interview Heather's roommate, Tara. Now, this interview was held out in the open of the station.
Yeah, same with Ken and Maureen's.
No private room or anything.
Right.
And Tara knew that whatever she said, her friend nearby would pass whatever she said on to Heather. So she may be less than forthcoming.
Right. So both of the Temple's cars were impounded and inspected. It was noted that the blue truck David drove the day of the murder did not have a car seat in it. Now, Tara Hall contacted an attorney and went back for another interview with police, and she told them about David staying over in Heather's bedroom, the necklace he had given her for Christmas, and that a few days before the murder, Heather had told her that David had said he had fallen totally in love with her. So after talking to the toddler teacher at Evan's daycare, police wondered why David would have taken Evan to the park and shopping if the boy had been sick.
Well, yeah, there's no reason to.
It's odd.
It's very odd. Here's a sick kid with a fever.
Right.
Why are you going to take him out?
Yeah.
And if he's sick, wasn't he in his crib or his bed?
I don't know. I guess he's saying he was feeling better.
He is, obviously.
Now, Belinda's parents were actually protective of David and didn't know of any problems in the marriage because they hadn't really stayed close.
Well, they were distant observers.
Yeah. But Brenda knew, and she told them about the tensions between the two of them when she had visited, which had been less than 2 weeks earlier.
That's right. So they have a remembrance ceremony that was held at the home of David's parents, and family members from both sides attended. As Belinda's family shared stories about Belinda, Maureen shared pictures of her from recent family get-togethers. But the Lucas family is very disturbed by David's attorney, who sat at a table with members of the Temple family, David included, and they're talking quietly. So it's like there's some conspiracy thing going on here. Then one of David's uncles announced that David's lawyer had something to say. So Paul Looney was the lawyer representing David at that time. He stood in the middle of the room and said, "We believe in the next few days that David will be arrested. You all need to support him."
So not the appropriate place for that, I would say.
Probably not, huh?
So he said the investigation was out of control and they were trying to interview Evan. He told them all to go to the DA and tell them that they didn't want Evan interviewed. Then David took Brenda aside and confessed that he had been having an affair and he hadn't been hunting on New Year's Eve weekend. 2 young boys who lived directly behind the Temple home thought they heard something that might help to establish a time of death. The boys, 8 and 9, had arrived home on the school bus around 4. They did a little homework and started to watch a Dr. Dolittle DVD. They heard a loud sound like a gunshot at a specific point in the movie when Eddie Murphy's walking down the street talking to a dog. So this scene was 27 minutes into the movie. If they were right, then David couldn't have murdered Belinda. He was seen on surveillance tapes at the grocery store at 4:40, and no one else in the neighborhood had heard this, though. So another lead was a teenager who lived next door to the Temples, and this student was Joe Sanders. He often skipped school and he smoked pot. Belinda had been to his house a couple of times. First, she asked him to turn down his music. The second time, she told his parents that he had cut so many classes he was in danger of being sent to an alternative school. Now, when his parents were out of town, Joe had parties. A neighbor a few houses down said he was actually a good kid who watched out for the younger kids in the neighborhood. He'd never been in any serious trouble. Belinda had actually liked him, and she was trying to help him stay in school. He didn't seem to have a reason to be very upset with Belinda, but maybe he was more troubled than people knew, so he was a suspect.
He was. And it turns out that he had lied about where he was on the day that Belinda was killed.
So that's not good.
That's very not good. He had told police he was in school, but he had cut class that day. Now, his friend Corey Reed said that Joe was with him and some other guys. They were driving around smoking weed. Joe also admitted that a week before the murder, he had taken one of his father's shotguns, which is a 12-gauge, without permission to go shooting with Corey. Joe and his parents were cooperative in the investigation. They agreed to have their home searched and turned over the shotguns and shells. Now, Joe Sanders was polygraphed 3 times, and each time showed some form of deception. And when police wanted to give him a 4th test, his parents refused, saying that he was emotionally distraught over Belinda's murder.
So the 2 shotguns came back clean for glass, blood, and brain matter. The shells were double-aught reloads like the ones used to kill Belinda, but a ballistics report ruled out the shells, saying they didn't match in the lead buckshot or in the wadding. Joe was absolutely ruled out, but there was no evidence that he or any other of the boys were ever in that house. So gunshot residue on David's hands came back as inconclusive. There were low levels found that could have been just from touching Belinda or her clothing. On the day of the murder, David was home for 3 hours after Belinda returned to work. He could have used that time to prepare the murder scene. There was no evidence that David was at a park with Evan. Belinda arrived home around 3:45. David was seen entering the grocery store with Evan at 4:32. That left 45 minutes for the crime.
There's another unexplained time period. After David left the grocery store and before he arrived at Home Depot, it took him 34 minutes to make this 12-minute drive. So this could have been a time when he was disposing of the murder weapon.
Yeah, a man who had gone to high school with David told police that he saw David that day at 5 p.m. at an intersection near his parents' house, where there were acres and acres of rice fields. Police wanted to find a murder weapon, of course, but if David was guilty, he would have known some really good areas where he could have hidden it. So they never did find a murder weapon.
Didn't take very long for David to begin spending time after Belinda's murder to spend time with Heather. Around Valentine's Day, Heather was seen in David's truck when he came to pick up Evan at daycare. So this is, a month and a half?
Yeah, a month and 3 days, actually.
So Tara started noticing that David's new truck was parked where it was hidden from the main road near the townhouse that she shared with Heather. So here's his wife, Belinda, being dead for just over a month, and he's sending Heather bouquets of roses for Valentine's Day. Tammy, Belinda's friend, was furious about the affair, and she began to follow David with her kids in the car. She's obsessed.
She became really upset and obsessed because she didn't like him, and she felt pretty confident that he had killed her.
Yeah, no kidding. So one day she learned from Quentin that Heather and David had both called in sick. She drove to Heather's townhouse, and she saw his truck sitting there.
Yeah, and she actually yelled and banged on the door, but they didn't answer.
Good move.
So the couple had barely a blip in their affair from this murder. By January 26th, they were emailing flirtatious messages to each other. On the day that police got a subpoena for their emails, Heather emailed David and said, "Please make sure you delete everything in your deleted folder and sent box." So the Temple family and many of David's fellow coaches were defending him, and none of them was pushing for police to find Belinda's real murderer. Tammy began to get hang-up calls at times when Quentin wasn't home. Now one day she arrived home and one of her daughters ran ahead into the house and came out seconds later screaming that there was a man in the house. Tammy saw a man run away from their home, and of course she wondered, is this David?
So football season comes around, and Heather's seen at David's team's games, wearing a jersey and cap. And she's sitting with Maureen and Ken Temple. And she leaves with them and Evan after the games. So it looks like there's more going on between these two.
Well, yeah, she's kind of part of the family already. They're definitely a couple. So that December, Cherika Adams, the girlfriend of Carolina Panthers wide receiver Ray Carruth, was ambushed and shot to death in her car by 3 men who pulled up beside her. So she was conscious long enough to call 911 and tell the operator what had happened. The ambulance came and they were actually able to save her baby. But Ray Carruth was convicted of conspiring to commit murder. Now the Center for Disease Control issued a report around that time also, stating that homicide was the 3rd leading cause of death for all women 15 to 44. For pregnant women, murder was number 1.
Not a good situation.
No. So they had 2 grand juries that didn't indict David Temple. And about 2 years after the murder, David and Heather got married.
Well, true love wins out, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
So in 2004, Harris County District Attorney Kelly Siegler looked into the case. So she believed that she could make a case against David with the circumstantial evidence that was available. David's arrested and brought to trial in 2006. Now, David and his family hired well-known attorney Dick DeGuerin to defend him. This guy's in the upper echelon of defense attorneys.
Very well known.
He's the guy who defended Robert Durst.
And got him off.
And got him off
for murder when he dismembered that guy.
He murdered and dismembered a body.
Yeah.
And DeGuerin got him off.
That was incredible.
Siegler and DeGuerin had gone up against each other before, and they loathed each other. So the prosecution argued that David staged the burglary and went out with Evan to develop an alibi. And the defense argued about the lack of forensic evidence, and they brought up Joe Sanders, the 16-year-old next-door neighbor.
Yeah, but Siegler called Sanders as her last witness for the prosecution. He admitted to skipping school and smoking pot. He denied having anything to do with the murder. He said he got home around 4:30 and took a nap. Now, DeGuerin said that Joe Sanders was a better suspect than David was, but Siegler said that David was the only one with a motive. So David was actually convicted and sentenced to life in prison, which was a pretty good conviction because they really didn't have any forensic evidence. So it was kind of a feat that she pulled off this.
It was.
But then we come to find out there were some problems.
There were some major problems, apparently.
Yeah.
So one was that an investigator named Steve Clappert worked for the district attorney back in the 2006 trial time. And Clappert drove Joe Sanders, the neighbor kid, to the airport several years later. And Clappert was told to return some property to him, which turned out to be a shotgun.
Right, because he'd moved to Arkansas. He was living there at the time.
Right. And then several years later, a new witness gets in touch with attorney Dick DeGuerin. This well, he's an adult now. Daniel Glasscock knew Joe Sanders from high school, and he said that he wanted to clear his conscience.
So he said back in 1999, he overheard Joe Sanders talk about a burglary that had escalated. He said he went into the house and upstairs, and the dog attacked him, and he shot the dog. They heard Belinda, they panicked, and they ran. So this description didn't match the crime, but the defense's theory was that dog was code for Belinda in this story, because the actual dog, of course, was not shot.
Right, but that's just a weird story.
It is, but I guess stranger things have happened.
I guess, but I'm not putting much credence in that story.
Okay.
If Glasscock is saying that dog was the code name for Belinda, come on.
Well, I know.
Okay. So DeGuerin gives Glasscock's statement to the Harrisburg DA's office, and Clapper checked it out. He's investigating a crime he'd been part of prosecuting back in 2006. So this is like he's switching sides or something.
Yeah. So facing mounting pushback from some of his colleagues at work, he actually left the DA's office in 2012. During that reinvestigation, Clapart was told to share the police report with David Temple's defense, who had never gotten a copy of the complete report. And when Temple's appellate attorneys, Stanley Schneider and Casey Gautreaux, read the 1,319-page file, they noticed details that they said could have altered the outcome of the trial. Details about alternate suspects and about the timeline on the day of Belinda's murder. Now, on the basis of this evidence, Temple was granted a hearing, which stretched over several months. In July 2015, the judge, Larry Gist, issued his opinion. So Judge Gist listed 36 items of evidence that he said the prosecution should have shared with the defense but did not, or shared too late for it to be of any use. So he recommended that David Temple get a new trial. But his opinion's only a recommendation. The final decision was with the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. So it took him several appeals?
He'd been through 2 appeals already that were both denied. And this final appeal was based on 3 things. One was a claim of ineffective assistance of counsel. Second was a claim that his due process rights were violated. And 3, claim of actual innocence. Now, the claim of innocence and the claim of ineffective assistance of counsel were struck down by the court. But they did find that a claim that his due process rights had been violated was probably true. And that's what led to the order for a new trial.
Yeah, so it took over a year to get the ruling, but in November 2016, in a split decision, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals agreed, and they overturned the conviction. And weeks later, Temple was released on bond. So although his conviction was overturned, he is still charged with Belinda's murder. So the question now is, what's going to happen? Is he going to be retried, or is the state going to drop the charges? And I don't know what I think should happen. I kind of feel like they might need to drop the charges because there's not a lot of evidence. Although I do kind of feel like he did it.
Well, I don't think there's any question that he did it, in my mind.
Right. But legally,
there's enough question. And also legally, I'm not sure they're going to be able to try him again. They don't, unless they find the murder weapon or something.
Right, or another witness.
But what they have is fairly slender.
Yeah, David's lawyer says there's no evidence that he murdered Belinda, and he wants his name totally cleared. But Belinda's family still believes he killed Belinda, and they want him to be tried again. So now it's up to the Harris County District Attorney. Local politics might also play a role because Harris County elected a new DA in November, who took office in January of this year. Steve Clapart, who says he doesn't believe David killed his wife, is back in that office as the lead investigator. So the new DA promised to personally review the Temple file and make a decision about the case, but Belinda's family is concerned about potential conflicts. So they've asked for a special prosecutor to be assigned before the decision is made.
Yeah, I'd understand that.
So while this is going on, and Belinda and her unborn baby, they're just buried in Katy, Texas, and their lives are over. Now, what's really funny to me, in a strange way, not in a funny ha-ha way, is that Heather raised Evan to adulthood, which is probably the last thing Belinda would have wanted.
I would imagine.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're going to go to feedback now, unless you have anything else to say.
Do you want me to go over what makes me think that David did it?
Sure.
Just, again, it's circumstantial.
I know, but you sound like you have something to say, so you tell us.
Well, I think based on prior behaviors is one thing, and he's having an affair, And although having an affair doesn't make you a murderer, it might contribute to it.
It contributes to motive.
Right.
Right.
I'm not sure about his story when he returned home. So I think the dog was out in the backyard all the time, and nobody was going to get through the backyard to break into the house. And if they're saying that this Saunders kid is the likely perpetrator, why does he bring a shotgun with him if he's just going in to rob the house?
Yeah.
So I just have a lot of stuff that makes me think that David Temple's the guilty guy.
Yeah, I think so. I think so too, but we'll see. It'll be interesting to see if it's tried again and what they come up with if they do try him again.
I'm waiting to hear that. Yeah.
But Kelly Siegler was definitely accused of not giving them all the information or giving them that big bundle of information before they had time to go through it.
Yes, she was.
So that was kind of curious because she was kind of my hero, and it kind of tainted my affection for her a bit.
Well, in her defense, I'd say that she was obeying the letter of the law.
And we know from Cold Justice that she does try and get convictions on circumstantial cases because cold cases are generally don't have a lot of forensics.
That's right.
So she's good at it for sure.
She certainly is.
But she's not there anymore, so she won't be involved.
No, she won't be prosecuting this one.
So just a minute here to talk about what's happening at Tie Grabber. In our members-only feed, we're in the midst of covering honeymoon murders, or as Dick calls them, adventures in honeymooning. Is that what you're calling it?
Oh, I can change that each week.
Okay.
I like adventures and honeymoons.
Yeah, okay. In September, we covered the disappearance of George Smith on his honeymoon on a cruise ship. The most recommended case is the one of Tina Watson. Tina was on her honeymoon in Australia when she died scuba diving. Her husband was suspected of murdering her. Now we're waiting to interview Michael McFadden, an Australian scuba diver, who was slated to testify for Tina's husband Gabe in the murder trial in the U.S. As a bonus, he also brews his own beer, so we're excited that hopefully he'll send us some. We plan to interview him when he gets back from a sailing trip he's on until November. So last week we released our episode on the case of Annie Dewani. Annie was killed by a carjacker back in 2010 on her honeymoon in South Africa. There was some evidence that her husband was the mastermind behind her murder, and Annie's family feels like they haven't gotten justice for her. There were a lot of secrets that came out, including trysts with a homosexual prostitute by the groom. Now we've built up a good collection of members-only podcasts, so if you join Tie Grabber today, you can download them all and have a binge. So joining is like a hunky piece of cake. Isn't that your old fraternity nickname, Dick?
Hunky piece of cake?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's me.
Okay. So
that's what all the women call me.
That's what I thought. So just go to tiegrabber.com and sign up with PayPal. If you don't want to support us that way, you can also support us on Patreon and listen to the members-only episodes there as a patron. There's also a free way to give support. The next time you shop on Amazon, just go in through the link on tiegrabber.com. Then Amazon will give us a kickback from your purchases that you would have made anyway. We won't know what you've bought. The prices won't be any different. So this is a great kind of seamless way to support the podcast. If you do have feedback for us, you can contact us at truecrimebrewery@tiegrabber.com, on Twitter at tiegrabberpods, on Instagram at tiegrabberpodcasts, on our Facebook page, or at the True Crime Brewery Facebook discussions page. And you can also send any t-shirt entries you have for our new t-shirt design on any of these.
That's right. Get those t-shirt
platforms.
entries in.
Yeah. So as always, we appreciate so much our listeners, and I will read all your feedback and try and get to every topic. So thank you for all the support you've given us and for listening. And one more request, if you have a few spare minutes, give us a 5-star review on iTunes and tell your friends about the podcast. So that takes care of the self-promotion for this week. We're going to have a little music, and we've got some great feedback today.
Let's do some feedback.
What goes to waste?
Welcome to feedback. So we're going to start out our feedback section with a voicemail. Yay, we got a voicemail.
Yay, voicemail.
All right. So
let's get more.
All right. Well, let's just appreciate the one we have first. Let's listen to that.
Thank you.
Hey, Dick. Hey, Joe. My name's Erica. I am nerding out a little, leaving you guys this voicemail because you've quickly become my absolute favorite podcast. I even joined Team Tie Grabber recently to access all the members-only episodes because I've binge listened to everything else available. I love the fact that I always learn something new, even about the cases that I'm familiar with, and Dick's dry sense of humor and sarcasm are amazing because I can totally relate. I'm a medical coder, and I have an innate disdain for physicians, but he quickly won me over. My original recommendation was going to be for the Gypsy Rose Blanchard case, but it seems like you guys will likely cover it soon. So my second recommendation is the East Area Rapist. He's an unidentified male. Jill, I know you like the unsolved cases. And he committed 50 rapes and murdered 12 between 1979 and 1986 in Northern California. I know police had nothing but the best intentions, but I can't help but feel if they had released some of the details leading up to each attack, maybe some of his crimes could have been avoided. I would love to hear your opinions on this one. A special thanks to Jill, who quickly helped me figure out my technical difficulties while trying to get into my member profile today. You guys are awesome. Keep it up. I really appreciate all of your hard work that you put into each of these episodes. Bye.
That was a nice letter.
Yeah, what a great voicemail, huh?
Yeah.
Thanks, Erica. Plus a really interesting case that we'll definitely look into.
Yeah. 50 rapes and 12 murders.
Oh,
I mean,
God, that's horrible. And not discovered yet. Not solved.
We might have to look into that.
Yeah.
Not that we're going to solve it or anything.
No, probably not, but it'd be interesting to cover.
It would be.
Yeah. Okay, so I have a letter from Simone from Australia on the Aussie terms that we were talking about in Dead by Friday.
And I'm sure we were wrong on most of them.
So, hi, Jill and Dick. I just wanted to say I adore your podcasts for every possible reason imaginable. I did have a little giggle over the recent podcast, Dead by Friday. I'm Australian, and I thought I would let you know about a couple of our colloquial terms which you found cute or funny or were unsure about. The one that made me giggle was when they went to the servo. Servo is short for service station, which is where we buy petrol, or gas, which is what we'd call it, or gas, milk, bread, snacks, or takeaway food, depending on the size of the servo. It's the equivalent of your gas station. Chasey is exactly like tag, and could also be called tiggy, and sometimes we used to play kiss chasey. Chasey isn't hide and seek usually. When chasey is played, it's a group of kids running around the child who is it, chases after the other kids and tags them, making them it. And so it continues. Hide and seek is where the kids hide and are found. I'm sure there were others, but I can't remember them now. I hope this finds you well. Keep up these awesome podcasts. I'm loving them. Well, thanks, Simone.
Simone, you're great. Thank you.
I really do think the Aussies have a great way of adding Y's and O's to things and making cute little names for them.
Yeah, I like servo.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. What have you got?
I have one from MBV Underground regarding Darlie Rudier. We keep getting mail from her.
Yeah, so everybody knows the Darlie Rudier. She was convicted of killing her 2 young sons.
Right.
And she tried to say it was an intruder.
An intruder.
Yep.
And there's some thinking that her husband might be complicit.
Oh, there's all kinds of thinking on this case.
So MBV Underground says that I definitely think Darlie is guilty. The forensics are just too strong. I do think that Darren was absolutely involved. First of all, I don't think in any of the tape footage of him did I see any hint of sadness for his loss. Also, I think a plausible idea is that they conspired with each other to do this and made a decision that Darlie would do it because they assumed it would be way less likely that a jury would believe a mother would do that instead of the father. Well, we think that too.
Yeah.
I think they thought they could get a sympathetic jury due to the societal view of the sanctity of motherhood. But going way back, I think given the fact that there are accounts from others, mainly Darlie's father, that Darren came to him wanting to have items stolen for the insurance money, shows that he's the type of person that would commit insurance fraud on a car and other personal items. Absolutely shows psychopathology. Now, maybe to some, I think I'm making a stretch here to complicity, to murder, but I think a lack of conscience is one main hallmark of a personality disorder. such as narcissistic personality disorder and/or sociopathy. That part of your podcast alone really makes me turn against Darren, and therefore Darley. I'd like to know more about the psychological testing I'm sure she received, and also more acquaintances and loved ones' testimony as to the type of people they were. Forensics in terms of DNA, blood patterns, etc., may be paramount in our court system, but I really think the psychology of these two and the family dynamics are of equal importance, especially if much of any given case is circumstantial, which this was.
Yeah, I just think, well, there was a lot of forensics. I mean, we saw it on Forensic Files, an episode on this.
There were.
There was quite a bit of forensics.
But there wasn't genetic evidence.
Well, that's hard to get when everybody lived there.
Right.
And
but the forensic evidence was pretty striking.
Yeah, it was. And there was actually some very unusual dysfunction in that family, I think, as that writer alluded to.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think so.
Okay, so I have a letter from Shauna, one of our regulars. Loved your coverage of Shonda Scher's distressing murder. I find from my own readings of tandem or group homicide that there is always one person who dominates the group. The others in the group respond primarily through wanting to be accepted, as well as fear of the dominant group leader or leaders. It's certainly not a mitigating factor, but it's difficult to not feel sorry for Tony, who was in a terrifying situation, and, I think, who was almost powerless to do anything about it. I'm wondering what others think about this, particularly as it relates to this case. So this is something we've talked about just in our free time driving around. I've said, I've been thinking about this Tony. We've talked about her.
Yeah, we have.
Because I really do feel kind of sorry for her, but then we always come back to the stops they made at the gas stations, the stop they made at Laurie's home, that she did have opportunities to get out of the situation.
Right, and we've discussed, though, that she was kind of under the spell of the dominant girls.
Yes.
And she couldn't or didn't want to.
Couldn't. She had a hard time, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't have an easy answer to that.
No, I didn't expect you would, but I think it's definitely something interesting to think about.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole dynamics of groups that kill.
Well, yeah, because I can kind of see how you can get caught up in something, especially when you're young like that.
Yeah.
And then also she may have felt threatened as well.
Well, I think she definitely felt threatened.
Yeah.
Okay, I have another one. This is from Amanda M., and this is a suggestion. Amanda M. says, I would love for you to cover the case of Rhonda Morrison from Monroeville, Alabama, late 80s, early 90s. She's a pretty 18-year-old white female working at a cleaner's. She was raped and killed one Saturday morning. Walter McMillan, a black man, was convicted and sentenced to death row, basically because two white men implicated him. He was exonerated later, and the case is unsolved. There's a book written on it, Circumstantial Evidence. Hope my information is accurate, going strictly on memory. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, we can look into that one.
So let's do that.
I always like it if there's a book or two written, because then you can really get some details. So I have a note here from Rosie, and it's in response to Mean Girls, the Shonda Scher case, which was our most recent one. And this is about children who kill. And it's a little bit lengthy, but I think it's great, so I'm going to read it. So Rosie says, well, you've done it again, made me think. The case of poor Shonda Scher actually made me cry. She seemed very trusting and naive, and why shouldn't she have been? She was a child. With depressing frequency, news stories keep coming up about one of the most perplexing of all crimes, homicide committed by children and teens. I am a social worker working with families of disturbed children, so this episode was of particular interest to me. As recent research has shed light on children who murder, experts have become troubled about the intensification of youthful homicidal behavior. Statistics compiled by the Federal Bureau of Investigation show 7.88 of 100,000 Americans were arrested for homicide in 2002, but the rate among 17-year-olds, for instance, was more than double the rate for all ages. Generally, the percentage of kids who are violent is the same, but the violent kids are more violent and are committing more crime. Psychiatrists warn that there is no one type of youthful killer, but murderous children often come from families where they see or experience much violence. So that made me think of Melinda.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, almost always the young murderer doesn't come from a typical family. The average American parent doesn't need to fear being murdered by their child. Homicide by children 12 and under is rare. Murder starts to become prominent in the statistics at 13 and 14. At 15, it's almost as high as the rate for all ages. From 15 on, the homicide rate continues to rise sharply each year during adolescence, according to FBI statistics. The overwhelming majority of murderers are male. I have read about 2 noticeable categories among youths under 16 who killed. One group consisted of non-empathetic murderers, children who lacked the psychological ability to put themselves in the place of another. Each killer in this category had a history of assaultive behavior, severe reading problems, and inability to cope with stress. Each had spent the first year of life either in a poorly staffed institution or with a mother who provided little psychological support. One such killer, a boy of 15, was charged with the deaths of an elderly woman and a 6-year-old girl. "I don't know the girl, so why should I have any feelings about what happened to her?" he said. So therapy is unlikely to change such unfeeling murderers. The researcher's second category was sexual identity conflict murderers. So these boys were often taunted for being feminine, and they carried a weapon because they lacked physical confidence. They came from homes where the mother was dominant and the father, if present, was passive. Now their murders, though done in passion, had often been subtly encouraged by a parent. In one such case, Ronald, 13, had been tackled in a sandlot football game by an older boy, who then rubbed Ronald's face in the mud. Ronald's parents had told him to do anything necessary to defend himself. So mortified, Ronald ran to his father's grocery store, grabbed a large meat knife, ran back, and stabbed his tormentor in the heart, while his father stood by and watched. Now these murderers do suffer guilt and can benefit from psychotherapy, and they are unlikely to kill again. A parent can also covertly encourage murder within a family. An article, "Children Who Kill, a Family Conspiracy," in the Journal of the National Association of Social Workers, cites a case in which a mother made clear that she wished her ex-husband was dead. So her 2 sons, 7 and 8 years of age, eventually got the message and killed their father. A parent can also convey hostile messages about one child to another, thus stimulating an attack on a disfavored sibling. In studying violent children, about 4/5 have witnessed extreme violence directed at themselves or others, usually in their own homes. This is true for only 20% of nonviolent children. Many behavioral scientists say that all young people charged with murder should be given a full psychiatric examination. Many youthful murderers are not examined or offered therapy. No one wants to talk about this topic. We have an idealized version of childhood, and we find child murderers so disturbing because we can't possibly believe that children are that disturbed. Thank you, Rosie. That was really insightful.
Very thoughtful. I'm shocked, I guess is the best word, for the statistics that she offers in terms of the ages. I mean, I can sort of see that the younger kids murder on impulsive behaviors, but then I'd want to see it leveling out or decreasing, and it doesn't.
No, it doesn't.
So, boy.
So it is disturbing.
Sure
But
is.
I was really reassured that parents in a normal American family don't have to worry. Although then I say, what's a normal American family? How do you know that you're an average American family?
Well, you don't.
Because everybody has their stuff.
You can be pretty dysfunctional and still view yourself as a normal American family. But I know what she's saying.
Yeah.
Okay. Alan comes in with a recommendation. And this is a recommendation also mentioned by Alicia M. Stephanie Lazarus is a former LAPD police detective who was convicted in March 2012 of the 1986 first-degree murder of her ex-boyfriend's new wife, Sherry Rasmussen. She's serving 27 years to life for this. So in 1986, Sherry Rasmussen was living in a condominium with her new husband, who is Sherry Lazarus's ex-boyfriend. The husband comes home, finds his wife beaten to death and shot numerous times with a gun. So they initially thought it was a robbery gone awry. Lazarus was considered a suspect early on, but was cleared. Nothing happened for 23 years. And then the cold case detectives decided to reinvestigate the case, and they found female DNA from a bite mark on the deceased body, and Stephanie Lazarus's DNA matched that. Interesting.
And she was a police person?
She's a police detective.
That's interesting.
So Lazarus was arrested for murder and was convicted.
All right. So this is a recommendation to do?
Yeah, it sounds interesting.
All right,
Let's
put it in the to-do pile. So I have a letter from Jennifer H. on Madeline McCann. It's so sad that we have to change our behaviors because of perverts, but children have been taken from their beds, supposedly safe in their own homes. I think that's one reason that people have such a big problem with the McCanns, that they left 3 very young children alone with the patio door open while they ate dinner with friends. All were professionals and lied about what had happened, stating that the bedroom window had been broken into and Maddie had been abducted. It wasn't true. They should have been charged with neglect and child endangerment. But then Jerry McCann was a cardiothoracic surgeon. So she's saying there might have been some preferential treatment given because he was a big important guy. Well, they were both physicians, so they were professionals.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, you're less likely going to think that somebody higher up on the totem pole would do that.
Yeah, but I think they probably should have been charged with neglect or that, but I don't know. Who knows? I mean, I go back and forth on that because, yeah, they definitely should have had the door locked, though.
Well, yeah.
And really, can't one of them just not go to dinner each night? One of them stays with the kids? How hard would that be?
But they didn't think about that.
No, I know.
But good letter. Thanks, Jennifer.
Yeah.
So I got one from Lila Lolu, 27. So this is about the shaken baby Louise Woodward trial.
Okay.
So she's just kind of correcting us and saying that to pop something somewhere is absolutely an English expression, meaning to put something down.
Yeah, I thought it was. I think we said we thought it was.
It doesn't in any way infer force. I regularly use it, and I'm English. A minor detail, but it should be clarified.
Well, it should, because I think a lot of the jury might have seen that as a violent thing. Yeah. But I did think that that's just an English phrase, pop it over here, you know.
Right.
So I don't think she was correcting us. I think she was telling us that we're right about that.
She was clarifying.
Although that was a while back, so I'm not sure. All right, so one last letter is from Susan G., and it's about the Haley Cummings case. This is my armchair theory. She was out partying, so she's referring to the father's girlfriend.
Babysitter, girlfriend, soon-to-be wife.
That she was out partying with other guys, and the little girl woke up and went looking for her. So when Misty got home, that's the girlfriend, she found Haley missing. Perhaps I would just rather believe the little girl died of exposure than any alternative. So Susan's looking at the not best case scenario, but something that's not violent and horrible. Something that's more accidental.
Well, I would like to think that way, but this is a little kid. How far is she going to wander? So if she had gotten out and wandered around and died of exposure or something, I think she would have been found. She couldn't have gone that far from the home.
Sorry, Susan, I don't think that's likely to have happened, but I see where you're coming from.
Right.
No, I think there was some foul play, definitely.
Oh, no question.
And what a shady group of characters surrounded this case, huh?
Scumbags.
Shady, for sure.
Marginal types.
There were troubles in that whole extended family.
Yes.
And the behavior was not ideal. So it's really sad for her, for that little girl.
It certainly was.
It is, because, you know, you can't control what you're born to.
No control.
And that's why I can feel some sympathy also for Misty and the rest of the family, because a lot of them were born into this mess. It didn't start with Haley.
Well, no. And
it's been generations.
A fairly common theme in our discussions.
It is, yeah. It's sad. And I guess that's what allows for empathy, is that a lot of these things weren't choices.
Right.
Well, this was a really great discussion.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening, and we will see you at the quiet end.
I'll meet you back here.